When Snow White 2025 finally premiered in theaters back in March, it wasn't just another movie release. It was supposed to be, a cultural coronation.
Absolutely. It carried the weight of Disney's oldest, most sacred IP, and it was following these billion-dollar blueprints from Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King.
This was supposed to be the ultimate safe bet.
Instead, what it delivered was the single largest, most spectacular failure the modern studio system has seen in years. I mean, we are talking about a $270 million production.
$270 million.
Backed by a global marketing machine that somehow managed to lose an estimated $200 million. It fundamentally broke the Disney profit template.
And that is the staggering reality that we, the analysis team from the Urban Herald, are really grappling with today. Our mission isn't just to report that the film flopped.
Yeah.
We need to perform a true deep dive into this cultural flashpoint. We have to expose the underlying industry issues that allowed a brand as powerful as Disney to commit, such a monumental error financially and creatively.
And we've synthesized all the chaos. Our sources give us a really comprehensive picture of what was basically a perfect storm.
Right.
You've got the catastrophic financial data, the spiraling production chaos, the toxicity of the modern culture wars, the visual failure, the CGI.
And the audience fatigue. That's a huge one. The fatigue that was already eating away at the whole remake strategy.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our central question, the one that really defines this entire deep dive. It sounds simple, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
How did a project with this established billion-dollar IP and a massive budget manage to lose over $200 million and become one of cinema history's costliest failures? This isn't just about a bad movie.
Not at all.
This is a fundamental reckoning for the entire studio system, and we need to understand exactly why their foolproof formula just suddenly stopped working.
Oh.
So let's start with the hard evidence of the collapse. Let's start with the books, because the catastrophic numbers, they tell a story of complete inversion of that Disney template that was, for a decade, a guaranteed path to profit.
The scale of the financial commitment alone should have been a huge warning sign. The reported production budget stood at $270 million.
And that number is just enormous on its own. It's one of the most expensive live-action remakes Disney has ever even tried.
Right, but that's just the cost of filming. That's what we call the negative cost.
Exactly, and that's crucially where a lot of casual observers, they stop counting, but then you have to layer on the global marketing and distribution costs.
Which are massive.
Mm-hmm.
Industry estimates consistently peg the P&A, that's prints and advertising, at a minimum of $100 million.
$100 million, minimum.
And it probably climbed closer to $120 million, especially given they needed this global campaign to try and overcome all the early controversies.
So the sunk cost before a single ticket was even sold was what, $370 million? Maybe closer to $390 million?
Yeah, that's the real number. And this is where we need to kind of explain the basic economics for the audience. Why does a film costing $270 million need to make $600 to $650 million globally just to break even theatrically?
It's the split, right?
It's the split. Studios usually only get back about 50% of the domestic ticket sales. And internationally, it's often significantly less. Sometimes it's as low as 25% or 30%, especially in really crucial markets.
Precisely. So if half of your estimated gross goes straight to the theaters and distributors, you need to earn double your total cost just to pay yourselves back.
So at that minimum cost of $370 million, the required global gross was, $600 to $650 million. Mm-hmm. That was the mountain they had to climb.
And they barely reached the foothills.
They didn't even come close. The actual global gross for Snow White 2025 just stalled out at a mere $205 million.
Wow.
The domestic haul was particularly weak. It's clocked in at only, between $83 and $86 million. So when you run those numbers, the estimated minimum loss is just devastating.
So what are we talking?
It falls somewhere between $115 million and $200 million, and that's before you even factor in all the invisible costs.
Okay, wait, I want to press on that minimum loss calculation. Why are some analysts suggesting the loss could be even higher than $200 million? I mean, if the cost was $370 million and the gross was $205 million, simple math is about $165 million lost. Where does the extra damage come from?
That's the critical subtlety that really defines a blockbuster failure. You have to include ancillary costs and, most importantly, something called streaming write-downs and residuals.
Okay.
So when a major film underperforms this badly, the studio has to write down the remaining value of that investment on their corporate balance sheets. This film was budgeted to be a billion-dollar success, right?
And of course.
Generating profit for years in the streaming window. When it fails, that entire expected value just evaporates,
Mhm.
and they have to write off the capital. It's a financial acknowledgement that the money is simply gone forever.
So it's not just the tickets they didn't sell, it's the future revenue streams, the licensing, the merchandise, the perceived value on Disney Plus. All of that was either damaged or just totally eliminated.
Exactly. And the speed of the theatrical failure just accelerated that disaster.
Yeah.
The opening weekend, $42.2 million domestically. It was disappointing, but not, fatal.
Right. You can recover from that.
You can. But the second weekend was the definitive moment. That's when the floor fell out.
A massive 66% plummet. That sharp of a decline shows an almost total lack of repeat business or, positive word of mouth. And that is the oxygen for any blockbuster.
It immediately lost the top spot to, what was it? Jason Statham's A Working Man.
A far, far lower budget action film.
Exactly. And that rapid collapse indicated just immediate, visceral audience rejection.
And this failure, it looks especially brutal when we contextualize it against the successes that define the whole last decade. I mean, this strategy was supposed to be foolproof.
It was a money machine. It really was.
Look at 2017's Beauty and the Beast. $1.26 billion gross against a $160 million budget. Or The Lion King in 2019 pulling in $1.66 billion.
Even The Little Mermaid in 2023, which faced, significant cultural backlash of its own and was also very expensive, it still managed $569 million globally. Yeah. It landed firmly in the profit column.
Snow White didn't just miss those targets. It proved the formula was fundamentally broken. This wasn't a mixed result. This was, as you said, a total inversion.
And the so what here, as analysts have noted, is that the scale of this loss, potentially over $200 million, it basically wiped out Disney's entire profit margin from several of their smaller, successful original releases combined.
Wow.
It just demonstrated that in the modern studio model, one catastrophic gamble can nullify an entire year's worth of strategic, smaller wins.
So if the financial disaster was the symptom, the production chaos was definitely the disease. We need to go behind the scenes here because the budget didn't start at $270 million.
No, it spiraled up from an initial estimate of, $180 to $210 million? So it ballooned by nearly 40%.
How does that even happen?
Well, this section of our research reads like a Hollywood disaster movie script itself. The source material outlines this confluence of internal mismanagement and external industry crises that just drove the inflation and the inefficiency through the roof.
The first major blow was the 2023 industry strikes, right?
Oh, yeah. The SAG-AFTRA and WGA strikes were devastating for any film that was mid-production, but especially a mega-budget tentpole like Snow White.
So production just grinds to a halt.
It halts, sometimes for months, but the fixed costs don't. Disney had to keep paying millions in what are called holding costs, maintaining these massive sets at Pinewood Studios, retaining certain contractual crew, warehousing expensive equipment.
And then when they finally came back,
When production finally resumed, they faced massive labor cost inflation because the compressed schedules required all this expensive overtime for specialized talent.
and then on top of that, you had these almost comical but devastating on-set disasters. The Pinewood Studios fire.
Unbelievable.
It destroyed the elaborate thatched roof cottages they built for the village set. That was a huge, unanticipated cost.
And it wasn't just the reconstruction cost. It was the delay that came with it. Weeks were lost, which further compressed the timeline for post-production and required these immediate frantic scheduling adjustments.
Which always leads to rushed and more expensive solutions down the line.
Always. But the real money sink, according to all our sources, was the complete lack of creative certainty. The reshoot budget alone was staggering.
What are we talking about here?
We're talking multiple rounds, at least 3 separate major reshoot cycles, with some specific troubled sequences being reshot 4 or even 5 times.
4 or 5 times.
Think about what that entails. Calling all the actors, the crew, the specialized vendors back, rebuilding partial sets, resecuring locations, and paying every single one of them premium rates.
That just suggests the director, Mark Webb, was operating without a clear, unifying vision. He's just constantly trying to appease executive notes based on these constantly failing test screenings.
It's a classic case of trying to edit the film in production, rather than just trusting the initial vision.
And we can't forget the lingering costs of the pandemic either. Early filming included all those mandatory quarantines, the testing, reduced crew sizes,
Which naturally extended the shooting schedule by weeks beyond the initial estimates. It basically baked inflation into the project from the earliest stages.
Okay, this brings us to what I think is the most fascinating element of the budget spiral, the PR disaster that caused this fundamental creative pivot.
The uproar surrounding the depiction of the dwarfs.
Yes. Here's where the budget inflation meets cultural politics head-on. This all started back in January 2022 when Peter Dinklage, the acclaimed actor, publicly criticized the original concept. He called the use of 7 dwarfs living in a cave together regressive.
And Dinklage's comments were highly publicized. Given his profile, it instantly put the studio on the defensive. Disney's entire strategy is risk aversion, so being labeled regressive by a leading cultural figure, that's an existential threat to the brand's modern image.
So Disney responded quickly. They put out a statement saying they were approaching these 7 characters differently after consulting the dwarfism community. But the resulting pivot was, to put it lightly, profoundly messy and expensive.
It was an immediate disaster for the creative side. Instead of working with the talented community of little people actors, which you'd think they do,
Right.
the studio panicked and committed to creating 7 Snow White CGI dwarfs. Digitally generated characters meant to avoid the physical casting controversy.
Which immediately eliminated employment opportunities for the very community they claimed to be consulting. I mean, the frustration from organizations advocating for little people actors was completely understandable.
I find it shocking that they chose to spend millions on rushed, complex visual effects rather than just casting the 7 roles of talented actors from the community, regardless of the classic tropes.
It felt like they were trying to erase the problem, not actually address it.
It exposed a real lack of creative courage. And the final film solution was just creatively incoherent. They ended up including this band of 7 diverse bandits of average height, with only one little person among them, as separate characters.
So wait, they had the CGI creations and this confusing group of bandits? That makes absolutely no narrative sense.
Precisely. It was a half measure that satisfied no one. Not the activists who wanted true representation, not the traditionalists who expected fidelity, and certainly not the critics who saw it as just narrative overkill.
It was a multi-million-dollar admission of creative indecision, a studio trying to solve a nuanced cultural problem with a blunt, expensive technological fix.
And as we'll discuss later, that fix ended up creating a significant visual problem too.
And all of this chaos, it lands squarely on the director, Mark Webb, who seemed to be facing an impossible mandate from the very start.
He was in a no-win situation. Webb reportedly wanted a darker, more grounded fairy tale. He wanted to focus on the psychological elements, especially the evil queen's envy.
But the
executives were terrified of losing the family audience. They pushed hard for a lighter, family-friendly tone, demanding musical numbers and all the traditional beats.
And the final product, predictably, suffered from this awkward splitting of the difference. Critics described it as feeling stitched together, moving erratically between grounded drama and these saccharine musical moments. You could just see the seams of compromise everywhere.
The script uncertainty was palpable. As you said, it went through at least 7 drafts, with different writing teams trying to accommodate all these conflicting executive notes. When a script lacks a singular creative vision, it rarely connects with an audience.
And the specific narrative changes, like removing the romantic subplot and emphasizing Snow White's journey as a leader, they were perceived as purely obligatory.
Critics used the phrase ideological retrofitting, suggesting these updates lacked any earned emotional weight to justify such major departures from the source material. It was modernization for modernization's sake.
And that risks alienating your core nostalgic audience without providing anything new or compelling enough for a fresh one.
So if the production chaos inflated the budget by $100 million, the external culture war controversy that surrounded the lead actress, Rachel Zegler, that effectively destroyed the film's pre-release marketability. It ensured its theatrical death. She became an inescapable lightning rod.
The controversy started pretty subtly right after her casting was announced in June 2021. She is half Colombian and half Polish, not adhering to that classic pale skin description of the character.
And while the film is a fantasy, online detractors immediately seized on this. They framed it as yet another instance of Disney prioritizing a specific political agenda over fidelity to the source.
Zegler tried to address this. She explained that the film would recontextualize the name Snow White as relating to her surviving a snowstorm, not her complexion.
And while it was intended to be inclusive, the explanation inadvertently just solidified the controversy. By suggesting the original framing needed correction, it fed into the narrative that the film was apologizing for or trying to fix the source material.
Our analysis contrasts this with prior Disney remakes. I mean, they typically relied on Huge established stars, Emma Watson, Will Smith, who had enough pre-existing cultural capital to kind of transcend these casting debates.
Zegler was a relative newcomer. Despite her incredible talent in West Side Story, the subsequent controversies carried a far greater strategic risk because she just didn't have that institutional standing to weather the storm.
And the situation became truly explosive in 2022 when she made those critical remarks about the 1937 classic in several interviews.
Right. She called the film dated. She criticized Snow White's perceived passivity, and most famously, she referred to Prince Charming as a guy who literally stalks her in the original.
As a strategic move, these were just disastrous comments.
They were immediately weaponized. Compilation videos of these quotes circulated everywhere, framed by conservative commentators as proof that the star was contemptuous of the beloved source material and the nostalgic audiences who cherished it.
She instantly became a permanent liability in the film's marketing campaign. The movie was politicized long before the first trailer even dropped.
But the real shock came much later, from her very active social media use. Specifically, two major political explosions late in the game. In August 2024, during a critical promotional period at D23,
Yeah.
Zegler added a post stating, "And always remember, free Palestine."
That post was a strategic nuclear bomb. It generated, 8.8 million views, which, critically, was 4 times the engagement of the official promotional message she was supposed to be delivering.
Disney executives, according to internal sources, were absolutely stunned. Producer Mark Platt reportedly had to fly to New York to personally confront her about tying a $270 million tentpole to such a sensitive and divisive geopolitical statement.
And the spillover effect was immediate and severe.
Her co-star, Gadot, who is Israeli, faced a relentless onslaught of highly coordinated death threats online. This wasn't just online vitriol. This crossed into real-world security threats.
So Disney had to get involved.
Disney was forced to arrange increased security for Gadot and her family. We're talking private security for her children's school and her home in Los Angeles.
Wait a minute. So a casting discussion, amplified by a star's social media post, led to one of Hollywood's biggest stars meeting armed security. That just shows the magnitude of the toxicity and how far outside the realm of cinematic critique this entire thing had spiraled.
Absolutely. And the damage was compounded 3 months later. After the hotly contested 2024 U.S. presidential election, Zegler posted again.
What did she say?
She posted, "Fuck Donald Trump, and may Trump supporters never know peace."
That timing was fatal. An industry insider quoted in one of our sources noted that Zegler was, in effect, signaling to half the potential audience to stay home with an already critically troubled film.
And the studio's apparent paralysis, their hesitance to impose any restrictions on her social media, whether it was due to legal advice or fear of internal backlash, that was viewed as a major strategic failure in damage control.
And this damage wasn't just contained to the domestic market, was it?
Not at all. The controversy created severe international distribution problems. Several lucrative Middle Eastern countries delayed or just outright banned the film, citing both Gadot's nationality and Zegler's highly publicized political statements.
But that eliminated crucial high-profit markets.
Completely. It compounded the financial disaster and ensured the film never had a chance in hell of reaching that required $650 million break-even point. The film just became collateral damage in culture wars, entirely beyond its creative or commercial control.
The political toxicity, it fueled this external campaign aimed at destroying the film's reputation. But we also have to examine the profound disconnect in the actual audience reception, the critical collapse that exposed this organized effort to skew the data.
The metrics are truly bizarre, unprecedented in modern blockbuster history. On the Internet Movie Database, IMDb, Snow White sank to a 2.2 out of 10 rating,
2.2.
which is the absolute lowest ever recorded for a major studio production of this scale. The source material notes that of the hundreds of thousands of user reviews submitted, an astonishing 91% were single-star ratings.
That level of negativity is just. It's highly suspicious. It suggests that even if the film was terrible, the rating wasn't organic.
And IMDb confirmed that suspicion. Their platform actually flagged the film for intense review bombing. They detected coordinated voting patterns and mass user registration spikes that indicated an organized political campaign.
So it was aimed specifically at sabotaging the rating rather than collecting genuine audience reactions.
Exactly, and this is a critical factor in understanding the film's public perception.
But the verified metrics, the ones that actually measure the quality of the film rather than the political climate, they tell a significantly different, though still pretty sobering, story.
Right. Verified critics on Rotten Tomatoes rated the film 39% rotten. which, while poor, is only a 5.5 out of 10 average.
So that suggests a mediocre and creatively uncertain film, not an utterly unwatchable disaster.
Exactly. And crucially, verified audience members, people who actually purchased tickets and submitted authenticated reviews, they rated the film substantially higher. 74% on the popcorn meter with a 3.9 out of 5 average.
74% versus 2.2 out of 10. That gap is one of the largest in Rotten Tomatoes history. It exceeds the splits we saw during the releases of films like Captain Marvel and The Last Jedi.
It clearly illustrates that the film was creatively disappointing, but the public aggregate rating was a catastrophic reflection of coordinated harassment and toxicity.
And then there's the cinema score.
Right, which surveys dedicated opening night audiences leaving the theater, the people who were most excited to see the film. Snow White earned a B+ Kercha.
Which just doesn't sound terrible.
Well, it's not an F, but it's significantly lower than previous Disney remakes, which almost universally earned A or A ratings. It confirms that even the most enthusiastic core audience was measurably less satisfied.
So the culture war weaponized the data, but the film's actual creative and visual flaws, they provided tangible ammunition for those detractors to exploit. Let's talk about that visual problem, the uncanny valley of the CGI dwarfs.
This is the ultimate irony of the whole production. The attempt to solve the political problem created a profound visual problem.
And we all know the term uncanny valley, right?
It's that sensation of discomfort, that repulsion that arises when a digital human or creature looks almost realistic, but just contains these subtle, unsettling flaws. And that visual discomfort, that uncanny valley, it instantly poisoned the well for the marketing team and gave critics a really clear target.
The descriptions from early audiences were brutal. Creepy, awkward, weird, particularly when the CGI dwarfs were positioned right next to the live actor, Rachel Zegler.
The whole visual approach drew immediate comparisons to the visual failures of, 20 years ago.
Right.
Things like the Polar Express.
And this failure wasn't just a lack of artistic vision, it was a function of the production chaos we talked about.
Absolutely. Anonymous visual effects artists later confirmed that the quality was compromised because of the compressed post-production schedule. They just didn't have sufficient time or resources allocated thanks to all the delays in the reshoots.
It forced compromises.
It forced compromises in rendering quality and in the essential work of integrating those digital characters seamlessly with the live-action photography.
And this isn't an isolated mistake for Disney either. It fits into this broader, recurring pattern of their struggle with photorealistic CGI in these live-action remakes.
It's almost systemic at this point. Look at The Lion King 2019. Technically brilliant, but the demand for photorealistic animals resulted in minimal facial expression. It just drained the emotional resonance that the original animation had.
Or The Little Mermaid in 2023. That faced heavy criticism for unconvincing CGI sea creatures.
Even Pinocchio in 2022, a direct-to-streaming product that still cost $155 million, featured a title character that critics frequently called creepy and visually rushed.
The deep insight here is that animation is a stylized art form. It uses exaggeration and visual shortcuts, that famous squash and stretch principle, to convey emotion and magic.
And when studios try to impose photorealism on those highly stylized characters, they strip away the very visual language that made the originals timeless and magical, and they leave behind these expensive, often bizarre, digital approximations.
Snow White 2025 didn't fail in a bubble, though. It really represents a major inflection point. It was the cultural moment where Disney's strategy, which was once a reliable profit engine, finally collapsed under its own immense weight.
We are witnessing the reckoning for the entire Disney remake era.
And the erosion of confidence was traceable long before 2025. The strategy started strong with those billion-dollar successes like The Lion King.
But the failure started accumulating. Dumbo in 2019 barely broke even. The $155 million Pinocchio in 2022 flopped spectacularly when it was just dumped directly onto Disney+.
By 2024, the trend was undeniable. Audience fatigue had well and truly set in. Our sources reveal that even the Disney adults, the superfans, the most loyal segment of the audience, they were growing profoundly weary.
They felt they were being force-fed content. The remakes were widely described internally as homework or simply as cash grabs, rather than genuine, compelling entertainment events.
The magic was gone.
The magic was gone. Why pay $20 for a ticket and $50 for popcorn to see a visually compromised version of a story you already own in a superior animated format?
And that fracturing of brand loyalty is strategically disastrous for Disney. I mean, if your most devoted fans are willing to just wait for the film to hit the streaming service 3 months later, the entire theatrical blockbuster model just fractures.
The data supports this weariness too. Disney Plus metrics show that subscribers were overwhelmingly choosing to re-watch the original animated classics over the new remakes.
So the remakes weren't replacing the originals.
No, they were existing as demonstrably inferior, expensive alternatives within the very same library.
And this fatigue wasn't just limited to Disney. Hollywood in general saw a disastrous box office performance in 2025. It indicated a broader audience rejection of derivative, nostalgia-driven content.
Exactly. You had flops like Tron, Heirs losing over $132 million on a $220 million budget. Audiences were signaling loudly and clearly that the appetite for expensive, safe, nostalgia-driven content, regardless of the brand, was just evaporating, universally.
But if audience fatigue is one major driver, there's a less visible but equally powerful strategic motivation for these remakes, and that's the copyright timeline problem, the legal angle.
This is a crucial underlying layer of the whole strategy. Disney has characters like Bambi, Peter Pan, and soon, much of the original Mickey Mouse IP that are entering the public domain.
Which threatens Disney's monopolistic control over these properties.
Exactly. So by spending billions creating contemporary live-action remakes, the studio attempts to reset the copyright clock and maintain exclusive control over the new, modernized versions of the characters.
Even if the remakes themselves aren't commercially successful in the short term.
Right. It's a purely defensive intellectual property strategy.
The irony is just profound. Disney built its entire empire on public domain stories. The Brothers Grimm's Snow White, Charles Perrault's Cinderella.
And now they are spending hundreds of millions, even billions, frantically defending IP to prevent others from doing precisely what they did nearly a century ago.
And the failure of Snow White just shows they are spending exponentially high amounts defending IP that audiences are actively rejecting in its new format.
The ripple effect of this failure also hit the VFX industry incredibly hard, and it revealed a totally unsustainable economic cycle. The complex and expensive CGI work for Snow White was largely handled by MPC, a Technicolor subsidiary.
And what happened to them?
Following the film's disastrous performance, the VFX giant, Technicolor, subsequently collapsed. They laid off thousands of VFX artists globally. Snow White served as a prime example of the unsustainable economics plaguing the entire VFX sector.
So the cycle is just brutal. Studios demand increasingly sophisticated, photorealistic, and expensive visual effects, like the 7 CGI dwarfs on these bloated Russian budgets.
But if the creative product underneath is hollow and loses $200 million, the box office return just cannot justify the investment.
And the result is this cycle of hyperdemand followed by massive, volatile instability. The artists bear the brunt. They face layoffs and often blacklisting, despite working under brutal crunch periods and tight timelines.
And those timelines force the exact compromises, the uncanny valley, that led to the film's visual failure in the first place. This failure wasn't isolated. It was a systemic shock that caused mass job loss.
And this failure has forced immediate and obvious strategic fallout within Disney. Following the Snow White flop, production on the live-action Tangled remake was suspended indefinitely in April 2025.
They hit the brakes hard.
Disney management is reportedly undergoing a complete reassessment of the $270 million budget strategy for remakes. We are unlikely to see tentpoles this expensive for this specific type of IP again.
Instead, industry analysts suggest a pivot toward smaller, likely direct-to-streaming remakes.
That makes commercial sense. The studio still has incentives to produce some remakes because the park revenue, the merchandise sales, the streaming library's value, they all still benefit from contemporary updates, even if they aren't profitable theatrically.
But the public spectacle and financial volatility of a $200 million theatrical loss are simply too costly.
Ultimately, this connects to the broader Hollywood malaise. As the screenwriter Paul Keating argued, Snow White is the logical endpoint of risk-averse studio filmmaking.
When brand protection and committee decisions supersede storytelling, aiming not to offend anyone.
The resulting content excites no one.
And the tragic irony is that the true successes of the decade original visionary films like Dune, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Parasite, they all prove that global audiences hunger for fresh, creatively confident stories.
Yet studios continue gravitating toward the perceived safety of established IP, even when that IP is clearly past its commercial expiration date. They were betting on the name, not the movie.
So as the analysis team here at the Urban Herald, we've synthesized the complete picture of this monumental failure. It was truly a compounding disaster built on multiple, interlocking faults that guaranteed its collapse.
We saw the hollow creative vision, torn between a grounded director and these timid executives. We saw the unmanaged controversy around Rachel Zegler's political statements, which alienated massive portions of the audience and had devastating spillover effects.
Including real-world security threats for her co-star.
Exactly.
We tracked the budget chaos ballooning to $270 million due to strikes, on-set disasters, and endless reshoots driven by creative uncertainty. And we saw the devastating visual failure of the unsettling CGI dwarfs, proving you cannot solve a political problem with rushed, compromised technology.
But the core strategic lesson, the biggest mistake the studio made, is perfectly clear. Disney believed that nostalgic brand equity was enough to overcome creative mediocrity and strategic risk.
They thought the audience would show up simply because the name Snow White was attached to a $250 million budget.
And they were wrong. The failure of Snow White 2025 is less about one bad movie and more about a cultural shift. A clear, expensive rejection of a corporate philosophy that prioritized safe, derivative, committee-designed product over creative risk and authentic storytelling.
Audiences want magic, and magic cannot be manufactured this way.
It stands as a billion-dollar lesson in what happens when a studio loses its creative soul and attempts to rely purely on past glories.
And this brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, as we wrap up this deep dive. We know Snow White will be culturally remembered for that dishonest, catastrophic 2.2 out of 10 IMDb score.
It is the defining cultural artifact of 2025, but not because of the film itself.
The real lesson here lies in that profound, unprecedented split between the verified audience score of 74% and the unverified, orchestrated low scores.
If coordinated, organized digital campaigns driven by external political toxicity can effectively destroy the public reputation of a $270 million movie, regardless of its actual mediocre quality.
What does that mean for the reliability of any audience metric we rely on when we're consuming media in the future? If review bombing can successfully transform a merely mediocre film into one of history's perceived worst, it raises really uncomfortable questions about where legitimate critique ends and orchestrated harassment begins.
And whether online consensus can ever truly be trusted again. That's the real strategic crisis facing all of us.